Below is an expanded 700-word Part 1, fully rewritten and extended for richness, tension, and cinematic depth. No headings. Part 1. The energy inside the Tamron Hall studio was electric long before the cameras began rolling. People had been lining up since dawn, clutching tickets and murmuring excitedly about seeing Denzel Washington in person. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood legend graced a daytime talk show, and the staff could feel the heightened pressure. Producers scurried across the set, adjusting lighting, tweaking camera angles, whispering updates into headsets. Everything had to be flawless. When the clock above the main stage blinked 10 a.m., the floor manager signaled the countdown. The audience fell silent, the theme music hit, and then Denzel Washington walked out. He moved with a quiet force that belonged to him alone. Not flashy, not theatrical, just deeply grounded, like a man who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove a thing. He greeted the crowd with a familiar half-smile, shaking a few hands before settling into his seat across from Tamron Hall. She welcomed him with enthusiasm, but beneath the polished confidence, a slight tightness flickered in her eyes, something even the cameras could barely catch. "Denzel, it's so good to have you back," she said, projecting warmth that echoed across the studio. "Good to be here," he replied, voice steady and smooth. For the first few minutes, the conversation was comfortable, even charming. They discussed his newest film, its themes, the emotional depth, the intense preparation required for the role. The audience listened breathlessly. Denzel spoke with a kind of disciplined passion, the kind that made every sentence feel intentional. A clip from the movie played, earning a round of applause that swelled to the rafters. But then Tamron shifted in her chair. Cards in hand, she tapped one against her knee, a subtle signal to anyone paying attention that the interview was about to turn. Producers behind the cameras noticed. So did Denzel. "So," she began, her voice taking on a curious, slightly sharper edge, "there have been reports from the set. Something about a disagreement between you and your co-star." The room cooled instantly. The applause lights dimmed. The studio audience leaned in, sensing a shift. Denzel's expression didn't change dramatically, but the warmth in his eyes hardened just a fraction. "Reports," he said calmly. "I haven't heard anything worth talking about." Tamron smiled, but there was a hint of strategy behind it. "Well, you know how it is. Stories circulate, people talk, and some say things got heated." He paused. "Tamron, you know me. I don't feed gossip." "Of course," she replied, though she didn't back down. She flipped to another card, one she clearly thought would break him open, and asked a more pointed question. "But the public is curious. They want to know if there was tension on set. Was there a confrontation?" The audience tensed. A few people exchanged glances. Denzel sat up straighter, the shift in posture unmistakable. "I came here to talk about the work," he said, voice edged with steel. "Not to entertain rumors." Tamron held her ground, but Denzel, clarifying might actually help put the rumors to rest. He didn't let her finish. "I don't owe clarity on something that isn't true." A sharp silence sliced through the room. Even the crew froze. For a moment, no one breathed. Tamron tried a soft laugh, an attempt to keep the conversation moving. "I'm only asking what people are already discussing. And I'm telling you," Denzel replied, eyes locked onto hers, "that I have no interest in validating what people discuss. If you want a real conversation, I'm here. If you want tabloid headlines, I'm not." Behind the cameras, the executive producer whispered frantically into his headset. "Move on," he instructed. "Move on now." But Tamron hesitated. Something in her seemed unwilling to relinquish control. She glanced at her notes again, a decision forming in her expression. Then she asked the question that shattered the room. "There were claims that you walked off set one day after an argument. Is that true?" And that was it. Denzel slowly removed his microphone pack, placing it with deliberate care on the small table beside him. "No," he said quietly. "This isn't what I came for." The sound of his chair scraping back echoed like a crack of thunder. Gasps swept through the studio. A floor manager rushed forward, trying to intervene, but Denzel lifted a hand, stopping him without a word. Tamron leaned forward, face pale, her composure slipping. "Denzel, wait, let's." But he was already standing. "I'm not doing this," he said. "Not today." Security moved in, protocol, not hostility, and within moments, Denzel Washington was being escorted off the set, leaving behind a stunned studio, a shaken host, and the spark of a controversy about to explode far beyond those walls. The hallway outside the studio was a frenzy of motion the moment Denzel stepped through the double doors. Production assistants rushed past with clipboards, security whispered hurried instructions into radios, and the muffled sound of audience chatter leaked through the closed studio doors. But Denzel paid no attention to any of it. His expression was calm, too calm, considering the storm that had just erupted inside. He wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. Just disappointed, and beneath that, something heavier, the sense of a boundary crossed. A young stagehand, no more than 20, trailed behind him nervously. "Mr. Washington, sir, do you, need anything? Water?" A car brought around. Denzel didn't slow his pace. "I'm fine, thank you." The stagehand nodded and stopped following him, relieved and overwhelmed all at once. Denzel continued down the hall until he reached the rear exit doors. He paused, pushing his hands into his pockets, letting out a slow breath. Behind him, two producers were whispering heatedly. "What do we do now? Cut to commercial. Then get Tamron back on camera. How do we address it?" Carefully. Inside the studio, Tamron Hall sat frozen in her chair as the floor manager counted them out of a chaotic commercial break. The audience buzzed anxiously, some people whispering theories, others arguing over whose fault the situation was. A few looked genuinely shaken. After all, no one had expected a daytime talk show to erupt into something that felt like a public rupture. Tamron swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she tried to reattach her earpiece. The producer's voice crackled in her ear. "Tamron, we need you to go live in 20 seconds. Don't panic, just acknowledge what happened, briefly, and move on to the next segment." "Move on," she whispered sharply. "We just had Denzel Washington walk off my set. You're a pro," the voice insisted. "We'll handle the damage later." But Tamron wasn't convinced. She could already feel the weight of public opinion forming like dark clouds on the horizon. She had spent years building her reputation as a thoughtful interviewer, firm, yes, but fair. And yet she knew exactly how this moment would be framed. Tamron Hall pushes too far. Tamron Hall drives Denzel Washington off her show. Tamron Hall turns interview into confrontation. The countdown hit 0. She forced a breath, sat up straight, and looked into the camera. "As you all saw," she began, voice steady but tight, "our conversation took an unexpected turn." The audience waited, motionless. "We respect our guests and their boundaries here," she continued, choosing each word like a surgeon selecting instruments. "Sometimes emotions run high, sometimes discussions go differently than planned. We wish Denzel well, and we hope to continue today's show with grace." It was a diplomatic statement, but even she knew it wasn't enough to stop what was coming. The moment the show cut to its next pre-taped segment, producers swarmed her. "We need to talk," one said. "The clip is already circulating." "Already?" she asked. In 2 minutes it had 5,000 reposts. And that's just one upload. Tamron closed her eyes. The storm had officially begun. Meanwhile, outside the building, Denzel finally reached the back exit where a black SUV waited. His longtime publicist, Angela, hurried toward him. "What happened? I only caught the last 30 seconds from the monitor." "What happened?" Denzel said, opening the car door, "is that I'm not playing games today." Angela nodded slowly. She had worked with him long enough to recognize the deeper meaning behind his tone. "Do you want me to release a statement?" "No," he said, "not yet. Let them talk. I'm not defending myself against something that doesn't deserve attention." They got into the SUV and pulled away from the studio. Denzel watched the city pass by through the tinted window, lights blurring as if the world were moving faster than he was. He thought about the interview, replaying every moment. He wasn't proud that it escalated, but he wasn't ashamed, either. He believed in boundaries, always had, and he had learned long ago that public image meant nothing if you betrayed your own principles to maintain it. Across town, in the newsroom of an entertainment network, two hosts prepared for a breaking segment. Denzel's walk-off had already reached producers, screens, and the decision was instantaneous. Lead story. "People are going to lose their minds," one host said, scrolling through early comments. "Half are defending him, half are blaming Tamron." The other host shrugged. "Controversy sells." By late afternoon, hashtags trended worldwide. Comment sections exploded. Fan accounts dissected every facial expression, every sentence, every breath from the interview. Armchair analysts produced frame-by-frame breakdowns. Even celebrities chimed in, some siding with Denzel, praising him for shutting down sensationalism, others expressing sympathy for Tamron, defending tough journalism. Inside her dressing room, Tamron stared at her phone as notifications flooded in. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, not from guilt, exactly, but from the magnitude of the moment. Whether she had pushed too hard or Denzel had reacted too strongly no longer mattered. The narrative had sprinted beyond her control. Meanwhile, Denzel sat in his home hours later, finally relaxed, the city quiet outside his window. Angela texted him update after update, all of which he ignored. Instead, he leaned back, letting the silence settle. He hadn't planned the walk off. He hadn't wanted confrontation, but he had made a choice, and he stood by it. Whatever the world said tomorrow, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His integrity was intact, and in the end, that was the only headline that mattered to him.